was just gonna start dancing. Like, I haven't heard that song for a long time. And yes, I was out at 3 bars last night too. So good morning, everyone. Nice to see you. So hi, it's really a pleasure to be here in Singapore. I'm very excited to be at this conference. It's a huge honor. And I thank you all for waking up and joining me this morning. If we haven't met, hi, I'm Lesley. I do things. I drink it, I know things. I am an instant responder. I work for a company called Dragos. Dragos does industrial cybersecurity. So a weird niche of cybersecurity we sometimes call OT, or operational technology. So that means I work on some very weird things. I work on things like cybersecurity for trains, and for power plants, and for manufacturing, food production. All kinds of non-standard industrial computers that keep the world running safely. And I've been doing that for quite a long time. I have a very eclectic background. I've been at Dragos for almost 8 years now, and I was one of the first employees there. But I've been doing industrial cybersecurity for even longer. I was in the United States Air Force. I worked at a small company called Motorola for about 10 years running their incident response program. I have a degree in electronics, in avionics, and in network engineering. And I do a lot of stuff outside of that. I also organize a lot of career clinics. I try to, my passion is getting young people and career transitioners into cybersecurity and excited about what I do. So I want you to be excited about industrial cybersecurity, or OT cybersecurity, after this talk. If you want to learn more, I have a ton of social media under the handle Hacks for Pancakes. I have a YouTube. I have a ton of talks out there on this topic. I have white papers through the SANS Institute, who I teach for as well. So hopefully I give you some material to learn more about this if you think it's pretty cool, like I do. But I have a relatively short amount of time today to get you interested in this area of cybersecurity, which is OT. And there's a lot of misconceptions about OT out there. There's a lot of misconceptions about what doing incident response or penetration testing or any area of cybersecurity in this space really looks like. So again, my specialty is digital forensics and incident response. I am one of the few people on Earth who gets called out when a power plant gets hacked. There's probably less than 100 of us working in the private sector globally. And there are all the other areas of cybersecurity in OT as well. There are people running red teaming. There are people doing malware analysis. There are people doing threat intelligence. And we do all of that at Dragos. And it's very different. So what I want to start with is, what are the distinctions? How do you have to shift your thinking to be interested in OT cybersecurity? And how do you have to develop your programs around it differently? Now, one of the first things some of you are probably thinking in this room, now there's probably some students and hobbyists in this audience who are like, yeah, I like OT, it's really interesting, PLCs, yeah, ladder logic. And then there's other people in this audience right now who are like, I don't have any OT stuff. I don't have any ICS devices. I'm not making widgets. I don't run trains. Let me tell you something. These devices are all around us. In this room right now, the lighting, the heating and cooling, the water in this building are likely all run by industrial control systems. If you operate data centers, if you have data centers, they have air conditioning units, they have huge backup power systems that are quite complex, and of course, there's the back end of your server racks, your integrated lights out systems that allow you to access your server equipment as well. That is all industrial control systems today at an industrial scale. And those are doing really important things for your enterprises. And a lot of them have been ignored for a really long time. And I'm not trying to sell you something here. I'm a terrible salesperson. What I am trying to get you engaged in is thinking about those systems and that they're important, and that we need to do cybersecurity differently around them. And that doesn't mean you have to call me. It means you need to figure this out. It means perhaps you need to call somebody. It means that you perhaps need to build this function inside your organization, because these systems are being increasingly attacked all the time. And I'll talk about some of the attacks I'm seeing against them, because I do this full time. This is my whole job, is getting called around the world when these critical infrastructure industrial control systems in a variety of verticals get hacked into and destroyed. So shift in thinking. So as cybersecurity people, something I've noticed about my colleagues, friends, and students is that we tend to be very, very much stuck in the world of hackery stuff. We care about domain controllers being compromised. We care about Cobalt Strike being detected on our systems. We care about seeing Mimikatz. We care about malware spreading across, swarming across our network. Those are the things we tend to care about as cybersecurity techie people. In the systems that I work in, is that important? Yes, perhaps. But the number one thing is somebody going to die? These systems keep trains from crashing into each other. They make sure that the data centers that control power distribution keep up and running and they don't overheat. They make sure the drinking water is safe. They make sure that production of whatever we make in our manufacturing facilities can still continue safely and reliably within the bounds of safe construction. These systems do real life and safety things. They keep very expensive equipment from being destroyed, and they keep, more importantly, human beings and the environment safe. So our shift in thinking for all of us who are thinking about doing cybersecurity for our own OT systems or perhaps moving into that space professionally is consequences first. In all of my talks and classes, the number one thing I will tell you, the first word I want you to keep in your mind is consequences. What is the worst day ever in this industrial network? In a lot of cases, the worst day is somebody being injured or killed. But even for simple industrial processes, even like your manufacturing processes, it could be your equipment being damaged or destroyed. That's very costly. It could be a poor product being produced. It could be not meeting your regulatory standards. So all of that are very severe consequences that aren't hackery stuff. They're not, I care about malware. They are, I care about whether somebody will be safe today. We have to change the way we think about cybersecurity. As we're having discussions with the engineers and the operators, the vital personnel who run these systems, they don't care if things are getting hacked into. They care if somebody's going to get hurt. You can talk all day about worms and malware and exploits to them and things being vulnerable, and they are not going to care unless you relate that back to, can somebody die? What is the actual probability of the equipment being damaged or catching on fire? What is the possible downtime for our industrial process? Those are the things we have to talk to them about. Those are the things we have to keep at the top of our mind. And we have to develop our entire cybersecurity program and incident response plans around those consequences and potential risk. So that's number one. Number two is we're dealing with very different people. We are never going to be the electrical engineering or chemical engineering, mechanical engineering experts who run these systems. What that means for our programs is that we have to involve those personnel and we have to work with them to develop an OT cybersecurity program. Yes, cyber attacks are happening against these systems. Yes, they can have huge consequences on the industrial process. To solve that problem, we have to make good friends again with those engineers and operators. That means things like job shadowing. That means rebuilding broken relationships. There's a little joke in my work that my job as an incident responder, it is marriage counselor, because I have to go into so many businesses and I sit at the middle of the table and the operators and the engineers are over here and the cybersecurity people are over here and they won't talk to one another. They hate each other. They won't talk to one another unless I'm sitting right here. All I have to do is kind of hand them some coffee and sit there and say about 2 words, but they hate each other so much that they need that intermediary to even have a conversation. So that is not a way to build a functional cybersecurity program. So that means we have to think about that, understand those priorities like consequences and risk, and really change our dialogue and our relationships with those teams, because we are never going to understand the process equipment like they do. And they are never going to understand cybersecurity like we do. Now, the third thing you're going to need to be cognizant is we deal with really old stuff. Now, let's talk about why that is. Why do we deal with these old things? I see Windows NT on a routine basis. It's pretty cool. So if you are not familiar with older versions of Linux and Windows, this is going to be a challenging world for you. Now, why does this old stuff exist? It exists because there's these long life cycles in OT systems. Okay, so when you go out and you buy a power plant, You go to an OEM, you go to like a Rockwell, Schneider Electric, Emerson, et cetera, and you say, I want to buy a power plant. And they say, okay, we will sell you this layer cake of technologies to make a power plant go. So all the way from the simple actuators, sensors, et cetera, to the simple computers like the PLCs that make it operate, to the higher level systems, things like SCADA, computers, the display screens, the HMIs that the operators and engineers work with. And they have spent a great deal of time building these systems to reliably and safely work together. That means months of testing. That means carefully configuring them to function in a very specific, safe, reliable way. You can't just pull things out of that. Not only will you void your warranty, it could have a massive safety consequence in your process environment. So what that results in is we have very few maintenance outages in these environments to do any kinds of upgrades or changes, and all of the upgrades and changes have to be approved by the vendor, by the OEM, by those operators and engineers, by the safety personnel. So updates happen rarely, and we have to live in that world. We have to work around that as cybersecurity professionals. And we don't often replace the whole system. So systems can be doing very important things and get quite old and out of date. And we have to be able to do all of our cybersecurity stuff, build our monitoring, build our security engineering, do a vulnerability management program, and be able to do forensics and incident response on some of these really old systems that are doing incredibly important things. And if we pull them out of production, the consequences are very severe. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we have to be able to do forensics and build security programs around like Windows 95 computers. At a minimum, like Windows 7 computers. Those are very, very common in these environments, and it is very, very challenging to upgrade and replace them. And that means that our tooling for cybersecurity is quite different. Obviously, EDR is typically only supported back to like XP Service Pack 2. So if you're talking about older computers than that, there's no EDR there. And a lot of the OEMs won't allow you to install those invasive tools because they could have a process consequence. They could introduce instability to the system. So we have to work with some older stuff. Sometimes it's really old antivirus. Sometimes it's passive network monitoring. We work with what we can get. Vendor reliance. As I mentioned, the OEMs play a huge role in these environments. You have to be cognizant of that. They support some of the systems. Sometimes they are the only ones permitted to touch some of these industrial computers by warranty, by agreement, by contract. So you can only ask them to provide forensic details or information about the systems. Those OEMs are a vital part of every industrial network. In most cases, they will be decision makers and they will provide you access to some of the systems you're responsible from a cybersecurity context for. And that means incident response. What I do is completely different too. We have to plan for incident response very differently in these environments. And I'll give you some tips and tricks for dealing with this. But IR logistics on these old computers managed by different third parties, different personnel, and doing very important life and safety things looks completely different. And I'll give you some ideas about how your plans should look different. But then there's also these PLCs and things, these low-level ruggedized computers that are doing the vital logic to keep the process running. And those do not look like Windows or Linux computers. There's occasionally some Windows embedded in there, but most of them are custom firmware, non-standard software that run very simple, ruggedized, low-level computers, which are inherently incredibly vulnerable. I see a lot of pen testers and vulnerability researchers, they like go out on eBay and they buy a PLC and they're like, I hacked it. And I'm like, I'm an incident responder and I can hack that PLC too. You send it a stop command and it stops. It's a very, very simple computer, so they are inherently vulnerable. You don't need to develop whiz-bang exploitation for them to do bad things to them. They are part of a holistic process, so there's a lot of safety controls in place. But as a simple device, doing forensics on them, building security around them is quite different than a Windows computer or a Mac or a Linux computer would be in our enterprise environments. And they also use a bunch of different protocols. There are tons of different industrial protocol, network protocols, and serial protocols out there doing these vital communications in any process network. That means like sometimes upwards of 20 or 30 protocols that do not look like Windows or Linux protocols that are doing very important things on these networks, and you have to be cognizant of as a network monitoring person. The next question, so this is all the weird stuff. This is why it's really different. But the next question everybody always has for me when I sit down and I chat with them at a bar or whatever is, so what does the landscape really look like? What cases are you responding to? So I can kind of divide my incident cases, and this is again what I do full time, into 3 general categories. So the first one is, yes, I get called into criminal stuff like ransomware, so commodity stuff. Let's talk about what that looks like. So commodity malware in these networks impacts the Windows computers typically. And the Windows computers are usually the higher level systems that look a little more familiar to us in these industrial environments. And they're doing important things. They are like the display screens that the operators and engineers use to make sure the process is running safely and reliably. They are the SCADA systems that increase process efficiency and provide remote access to it. So losing those systems has impacts, potential real-life consequences on the process, safety, life, production, etc., because you might lose your ability to see that the process is running safely, and that's a big deal. So if you're out there working with molten metal or something, and suddenly all of your display screens have ransomware pop-ups on them, you're dealing with a very dangerous process, very potential real-life consequences, life and safety consequences for the people working there. And you can't see the temperatures, you can't see whether the process is still running safely. What do you have to do? Well, you have to shut everything down. That's a safety situation. Your safety manager is going to say, you have to shut down this process. And when you're dealing with molten metal, that's a really dangerous thing. I have a bad feeling every time I have to go into any kind of smelting operation. When you have to shut that down quickly in an unplanned way, there is a very high likelihood that you will destroy all of your equipment. You will save a life, yes. You will get things into a safe state so nobody gets injured or dies, but you will likely destroy millions of dollars worth of equipment doing that. So real life consequences, even though only the high-level systems in this environment have been shut down. So yes, ransomware has a big impact. It doesn't necessarily impact the PLCs and the simple computers running the process, but losing your visibility is huge. The second thing that I deal with is insider cases. Now, insider cases in industrial are very strange. We didn't really know what we were getting into when we built this practice, because we were like the first ones to build a dedicated incident response practice for OT. And the insider cases are bizarre. Yes, we have some malicious insiders. We have a few occasionally who don't get a promotion, they're mad at their employer, and they decide to do something negative to the process. And nobody knows how to break it as well as the people who work on it every day. These processes are complex. They have layers of safety controls, but the engineer who's been there for 30 years and is suddenly really mad at the employer knows how to destroy everything. So yes, I do have to do analysis and forensics on some of those, but most people are honest. And the bulk of the insider cases I get involved with are like shadow IT. It's like somebody put security controls in that keep the process engineers from running the process safely, so they found a way to evade the security controls. They dual homed something. They stuck an antenna on. Maybe they were just bored. They're in a mine in the middle of nowhere, and they want to watch TV at night. And so they connected something to the internet that shouldn't have been connected to the internet. And usually that gets caught many months later, so you have months of the computer being exposed to the internet, and that requires a ton of analysis and forensics to understand how bad the situation is. And this is, again, why we have to rebuild those relationships, because this shadow IT stuff has real-life consequences that are very serious. The third category is the one you're interested in, though. That is the state and the terrorist-type organizations. And they are doing usually one of two things. The first thing is espionage, industrial espionage. So they are trying to steal industrial production secrets or understand how industrial processes in another country work. Or, more relevantly, they are pre-staging for future sabotage. They are not making something explode or catch on fire today, because that draws attention to themselves, and it has huge geopolitical consequences. What they're doing is very quietly, over many years, building footholds in critical infrastructure environments and stealing things like documentation, taking screenshots of display screens and control interfaces, and learning over a long period of time how to do something bad in the future. Like I mentioned, these processes are complex. They have lots of physical safety controls, they have lots of digital safety controls, and there's human beings watching them. So if you want to do something repeatable and determinable, like shutting off the power or poisoning the water or something, that requires a lot of homework. You have to really understand how that specific environment is configured and what safety controls prevent that from happening and how to evade them. So that means these more well-resourced nation states and terrorist organizations have spent years now embedding in these critical infrastructure industrial networks very quietly, usually using living off the land techniques like stealing credentials, and they're just watching. They're learning how to conduct an attack should the circumstances like conventional war arrive in the future. Now, not everything I get called into is a cyber attack. So I get called into, and that's good. Let's start with that's good. Lots of things break in these environments. This is another shift in thinking. Again, if you're stuck on it has to be hackers, you're going to have a lot of trouble in this space because things break all the time in industrial processes. Equipment fails. Human beings make mistakes. So a lot of the cases that I get called into where they're like, we think somebody's hacking us, we do analysis, we do forensics, and we find out that's not the case at all. And that's good. I'm glad it's not always nation-state hackers. Like, that's good news for me. This is kind of a scary job. I lose a lot of sleep over the things I know that the states are doing already. So that's great. One of the weirdest cases that I had was I got called at about 8 p.m. in the dead of winter. And I got called by a power operator, and they were panicking on the phone, as usually happens when you get an incident response retainer activation. And they're like, China's hacking us. You have to come here right now. I'm like, okay, tell me how China is hacking you. Well, our power plant just turned itself on. Okay, that is strange. Tell me more. Well, we have a peaker plant, and a peaker plant is the power plant in a temperate climate where there's 4 seasons that you turn on when there's higher demand, usually during the summertime when everybody's air conditioners turn on. So in more temperate climates in Singapore, you typically have a lot of peaker plants, and they go on for half the year. And this was the dead of winter. It was off. It was staffed by a skeleton crew, and suddenly it turned itself on. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's really strange. I'm getting in my car, okay. And it's a long drive out to this remote rural location that doesn't seem like a really big target for an adversary anyway. So I talked to experts on this particular electrical power system as I'm driving, and my colleagues, and even my boss, Rob Lee, the CEO of Dragos, and we chat about this. And it's like, yeah, this might be the big one. This is really strange. I mean, to start this peaker plant, you have to hit a series of 12 buttons on the screen. It's not like, oh, I accidentally clicked the wrong thing. It's like a sequence of 12 buttons in the right order to turn on this plant. I'm like, yeah, okay, well, I'm going out there. I'm going to take a look forensically, and we're going to find out what happened. I get out there, and I get out to this very remote facility. It's very secured and very isolated. There's barbed wire, there's fences, cameras around it. I go to the control center, and there are 3 people there. The first one is the security guard who has checked every camera, every lock, and nobody's been in or out. The other 2 are the skeleton crew of the 2 engineers who sit there when it's not on. And they were talking about a TV show, looking at each other. So they're both vouching for one another that neither of them touched a keyboard. They heard the power plant go on, and then they troubleshot. And they called the vendor. They've been through every troubleshooting sequence, and they found nothing wrong with this power plant. It was sent a command to turn on, and that was it. So, okay, so I tear apart their computers. They both have workstations. I go through them for hours. I do all of the forensics. I don't want to be like I'm a mastermind and I just knew what was going on. I spent hours doing forensics on their computers, their whole network, the packets traversing it, and I find nothing malicious. In fact, This power plant is actually air-gapped. That's incredibly rare today. They had no connectivity. When they were going to turn on in the summertime, they would get a phone call on an old school landline to turn on the power plant. So no connections in or out. I checked for antennas, I checked for wireless, nothing. Totally remote. No malware, no scheduled tasks, nothing malicious on those computers. Almost a bare, clean Windows 10 installation. So okay, what the power plant was told to turn on. So I asked them, where else could it be told to turn on? Well, you can go actually out to the physical unit and hit gears and switches and levers, but that's under a camera and nobody's done that. And I validate the camera and I check all that and yeah, nobody's been in or out. So where else can you turn on this power plant? Because it turned on. Well, there's one more computer. It's out by the power plant itself. It's in a shed, like an outdoor shed. Okay, let's go out there. So I put on all my safety gear, my winter gear, go out in the blizzard. And we go out to this little outdoor shed that's next to the actual generation unit. And there's a lock on the door. They pull the padlock in and they go inside. And they're like, this is the one China hacked. I'm like, okay, show me. So I go up to there's 2 racks in this outdoor shed. It's kind of a semi-exposed, just like a garden shed. And the first rack is all the PLCs that run the equipment. And that's just, it's fine. It's already been checked by the vendor. The second one is a rack-mounted computer. The rack-mounted computer has one of those rack-mounted touch screens. It's on, it's open. There's a keyboard and a mouse that pull out of the rack. And on the screen, every single Windows application is open. Command prompt is open. Calculator is open. RDP is open. And I'm like, this is not the movie Hackers. This doesn't make any sense. This is not something somebody would do. So I tear apart that computer. I do forensics for hours, and there's nothing malicious on it. Nobody's connected to it until that morning when they were doing troubleshooting. And I'm like, okay, when did these windows open? Well, they all opened overnight, and they all had focus for about 8 seconds each. And again, this is not the movie Hackers. And I'm like, this is like something clicking stuff on the screen randomly. This is an input device. So now I've got 3 input devices on this computer. I've got a touch screen, I've got a mouse, and a keyboard. So I call up my colleague, and I'm like, go to the store and buy 3 of these Logitech keyboards and mice, and dump some water on one, freeze one in your freezer, see if they start doing random input. So he does. He goes out and buys a stack of these Logitech keyboards and mouse, and he beats them up, and he freezes them, and he dumps water on them to try to see if he can get them to do random input. But it's not quite the right random input. So now I'm stuck with this touchscreen, and I'm staring at the touchscreen, and I'm like, this is a really bright screen that never locks. It's always open. The control screen is always up on it, and it's bright, and it's outside. Oh, so a couple of you are nodding now. You're following along. So every night in the cold, the insects, like the moths, would land on this screen, and they would hit random things, random input. And over years of them doing that, finally that night was the night they hit the right sequence of buttons to turn on the power plant. But now how do I prove this? How do I prove this? I don't have like a camera. And they're still panicking. They still think China's hacking them. I'm like, how do I prove that there's bugs landing on the screen? So what I do is I pull up Paint. I make Paint big on the screen. And I'm like, in the morning, take your phone out and take a picture and send it to me. And they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, I promise, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And so sure enough, 6 a.m. the next morning, they send me a photo, and they're like, oh. And sure enough, there's little whirls, little whirligigs all over the Paint screen. So yes, every night the moths and the other large insects would land on the screen, and finally they started the power plant. So the solution there was locking the screen. So yeah, you have to be prepared for weird stuff like that working in OT cybersecurity. All right. So the next question is, like, what are the real hackers doing? So it's not all bugs. Some of these are real cyber attacks I respond to. And across the board, all 3 categories, insiders, criminals, states, they're all using kind of the same methods to get in. And it's really basic stuff. A lot of people are really stuck on like Stuxnet, like crazy advanced malware, exploitations for PLCs, chips being embedded in supply chain interdiction. That's not really what's happening in most of these environments. These environments have been ignored and improperly secured for a very, very long time. Even organizations that think they have a cybersecurity program for OT are not doing well at architecture and security in OT. So the bulk of the cases that I'm seeing, very simple intrusion vectors. Now, attacking the process itself, doing something meaningful, does take that long reconnaissance, a lot of analysis, understanding processes, but the getting in, usually really simple stuff. It's like stolen credentials, lack of multi-factor, really exposed systems, dual home systems running old versions of Windows, lack of security tooling. All those things I talk about dealing with those old systems, those ignored systems, those poor relationships between the OT engineers and the cybersecurity people result in relatively insecure perimeters. And that's not just attacks coming in from the enterprise. Today, we have tons of remote access into these environments from a multitude of sources. And I'll talk to people and they're like, the only way to get into my OT network is the VPN through the DMZ from our enterprise network. And then I do forensics on a computer and I find like 8 mechanisms, like there's TeamViewer, there's RDP, there's a VPN concentrator, because the OEMs, the vendors today, all want remote access into your industrial network. They're starting to put cloud in. They want remote access because it's cheap and easy for them to do monitoring, telemetry, and support that way. So they, without asking you, will stick remote access onto everything, and it's usually very insecure. And there's also perimeter devices there that are oftentimes ignored in vulnerability management programs and not well secured, like Citrix or concentrators. So it's bad, and a lot of the intrusion vectors, our pen test team gets very bored with some of our cases. They're like, can't it be something exciting this time? Can't it be like a 0-day? No, it's XP exposed to the internet again. It's Citrix that's 5 versions old. It's TeamViewer without multi-factor. That's how the adversaries are getting in, both state and criminal, into most of these environments, because people make assumptions that their environment is more secure than it actually is. So here are some easy wins for you all. If you are thinking about working in this space, or if you have an OT environment you're responsible for, okay? Number 1, do not make assumptions about the cybersecurity or the architecture of the OT environment you are responsible for. Everybody does this, and it's a really big problem because I see everybody on their worst day ever. I see the tears, I see the yelling, the screaming, the swearing, the people losing their jobs. Really, really do not make assumptions. And the things that people usually make assumptions about in their OT environment, I have a current network map. I know what the remote access is into my OT environment. I know that there's not any other remote access. I know the security tooling. I have a good EDR, XDR deployment in this environment. I have current up-to-date logging. I have good offline backups of these systems. Those are the things people make assumptions about because they don't know these environments as well, and because they're just talking to the engineers. Hey, engineers, do you have antivirus on these computers? Oh, yeah, we've got antivirus. Do you have a current network map? Oh, yeah, here it is. It's from 2011. Here you go. Guys, trust but verify. You have to go out and validate that these things are actually secure and up to date, that you actually understand the landscape you're dealing with in terms of remote access and perimeters. You have to check. You have to go there with your little feet and walk up there and make sure there's no antennas plugged in and make sure that nothing has an extra Ethernet cable on it. You have to check. Monitor your exposure as well. Check things like Shodan. Make sure that you don't have exposed devices you don't know about, because the adversaries and criminals will find those right away. Validate your control implementation. If you think you don't allow USB drives, you better make sure that nobody can unplug a mouse and plug in a USB drive. There's tons of shadow IT in these environments. Make sure your controls actually work the way that you think they're going to work. Validate your monitoring and logging coverage. Again, this is a less familiar environment. Oftentimes there's a big OEM presence. You need to go make sure that you're getting proper logging, because I come into a lot of cases where there's a 6-month or 6-year-long intrusion and logs just don't go back that far, or they're not well covered in OT. There might be an amazingly mature enterprise cybersecurity program in these organizations. They might have the best SIM in the world. They might have the best agent deployment, and they have nothing in OT. They just made the assumption that they have full coverage in OT as well, and they don't. And I wish I was magic. I wish I could just wave my magic wand and make the logs appear out of nowhere, but really what I'm stuck with there is like old school hard drive forensics at that point, when there's nothing logged. And finally, you need to treat OT as a discrete area of cybersecurity. That means you need to have separate programs and plans, including incident response plans for these environments because of all the things I talked about. They're weird. Weird things happen there. There's different people and organizations involved. So you need to plan for them differently because life and safety, legacy stuff, non-standard systems, and all of the considerations that go along with those things. If you need to sell this to your executive leadership, there is a white paper on the SANS website that I highly recommend. It's linked on there. Take a picture. Easy to find. It's free to download. It is not a salesy thing. The 5 critical controls for industrial cybersecurity. It's broken down into 5 projectizable things that you can sell to your leadership in your organization. And they are real practical things I agree with as an incident responder. The first one is secure architecture. Make sure that if you have these vulnerable devices and legacy devices, you build strong bastions around them and you can isolate them. You need some detection and monitoring in these environments, and it's not going to look like your EDR in enterprise. That means sometimes old school network monitoring, logging, etc. You need a plan for what you're going to do if you, say, have ransomware in these environments. Again, completely different stakeholders, completely different areas of equipment, completely different containment and recovery strategies. Vulnerability management. Yeah, I mean, there's things we can't patch, potentially. There's lots of devices that will be vulnerable in our OT environment. We need to know what they are. If we're going to build bastions around them, if we're going to secure them, monitor them, etc., we need to know what's vulnerable. And I have what I call the M&M model for industrial cybersecurity, which means there's a crispy candy outside around a very gooey candy center of these vulnerable industrial devices. So if you have, say, vulnerable VPN concentrators, if you have vulnerable remote access on the perimeter around these devices, that is where people are going to get in. So you need to be cognizant of that. And finally, secure your remote access. Like I mentioned, OEMs today love sticking remote access. They love sticking TeamViewer and modems on everything because they don't want to go to the site. You need to know where that is, and you need to try to implement things like logging, multi-factor, strong authentication, and understand how that remote access is being used by those vendors. So here is a little guidance. This is a little quick cheat sheet. You could take some pictures of my slides if you want for developing an incident response plan to make your life better if you have to call somebody like me. So here's some tips. So very first, make sure you know who owns this plan and that it's actually going to be posted and updated by somebody. Make sure that there's good revision control, etc., and make sure that you talk about every stage of incident response. Make sure you understand who's responsible for what in your OT environment. Again, that's going to be quite different from your enterprise incident response plan. Make sure you know who makes the decision to move to things like containment or recovery. It's not going to be the same people. You are not going to be the safety decision maker for the process, and you need to know who those people are. And you need to communicate with those stakeholders as well throughout the incident response effort. Your severity level matrix needs to look quite different for OT, right? So what do we care about in enterprise? Well, we care about how many computers are infected. We care about worm spread. Let me tell you something shocking. Your entire OT network could be infected with a worm like Conficker, and that might be okay. If it is not going to kill somebody, if it is going to potentially kill somebody if you shut down those systems to fix them, you are not going to remove that malware until you have a maintenance outage. So your severity levels are going to be based on consequences, life, safety, and process, not on number of infected servers, not on whether the domain controller is compromised. Those are not your crown jewel systems. Your crown jewel systems are the ones that can cause those consequences of concern, so different severity matrix. You need to make sure that this is linked to things like your business continuity plans, and you need to test and drill these incident response plans for OT. You need to do things like run a tabletop around ransomware and see how that would actually work out in your environment. We've seen so many different problems, and usually they come down to not treating this as a discrete practice, not doing the right amount of actual testing of the plan, not making sure that there's enough information to function during an emergency. Again, it mostly comes from OT being an afterthought instead of being a primary consideration about an environment that keeps people alive. For your preparation of your program, make sure that you have good executive buy-in. Make sure that you understand what your plan covers and does not cover. And build a good dictionary of what terms are different in OT versus enterprise. You don't want to have collision of acronyms or terms with your operators and engineers. So it's really good to have a dictionary so you understand what they call things in an emergency. You want to have a drill cycle. You want to test that your things like backup recovery actually work, that your forensics tools will actually run in the industrial environment. Will they work on Windows XP? That's a thing you have to test. And you need to do routine tabletops to make sure that the flow of your incident response plan in OT actually works. I would suggest that you understand all the vendors in play. Again, these are things you can take little pictures of right now, but you can also get my slides afterwards, that's fine. Make sure you have good threat intelligence for OT as well, because again, this is a different targeting space. There's different adversaries involved. And make sure you know who you need to contact in those OEMs and vendors in an emergency. Finally, make sure you've got good network maps and asset inventories. I tell my customers, if you do not have a current network map or asset inventory to do forensics with during an incident, I'm going to have to spend the first day or 2 days of incident response burning incident response retainer hours or dollars to build those for you. So that's really, really important to have that done in advance. I have to know what computers are present to be able to do intelligent forensics during an incident. And again, if you have made that assumption, I've got a current network map, it's from 2011, I'm going to be spending a day rebuilding your network map for you. You need to try to train your IT personnel better on OT cybersecurity. And there's a couple tactics for that, but the number one thing I've seen be effective is job shadowing. Get your SOC analysts, your incident responders into that process environment. Have them learn what matters in terms of life and safety and process. Have them learn what the engineers do and build healthy relationships with those teams. But that's not all of it, right? The other half of that is those people, those engineers and operators who work in the process environment, they're interested in cybersecurity. They don't disregard cybersecurity. They don't avoid it. They don't think it's not important. They just have a different set of priorities, which is life, safety, consequences, and process. So what that means is you need to encourage those personnel to be part of the cybersecurity effort. That means having good communication channels and perhaps appointing them as plant champions for cybersecurity and getting them involved in the effort. That's a great relationship builder. Enable them, allow them to help you in cybersecurity instead of walling them off and auditing them. Respect that they know more about the process than you will ever know. You are never going to be the process engineer. You are never going to be the electrical engineer or the chemical engineer who knows the most about what could go wrong in the process. So do leverage their expertise to understand those consequences and how to build a good security program. That's all I have for you. We have some time for questions. Ask me anything. What do you want to know about OT cybersecurity careers, incident response? how to respond to incidents, how to do forensics in OT environments. I've got some time here. I would love to answer your questions. There's no dumb questions. There's probably no questions I haven't been asked before, so give it a shot. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks for the talk. Do operational technology or industrial control system ranges exist that people can practice with?
So the reason, this is an interesting question that I get asked a lot, and for anybody who didn't hear that, that was, are there ranges to learn in? To some extent, yes. You can get simulations of different industrial protocols. Those are available. But I would encourage you to shift your thinking from, I'm going to learn how to program PLCs or hack PLCs. The best thing that you can do to get involved in this space is to think about processes, systems of systems. So if you have any connection to anybody in an industrial process, whether that's transportation or manufacturing, food production, any holistic process, get into that, sit down with those people and understand what could go wrong, and then start reverse engineering with the people who work on that process. Hey, if you were a bad person, how would you cause a consequence? So like if you're talking about trains, if you've got, say, a family member who works on trains, hey, if somebody wanted to make a train crash, how would that happen? What would prevent it from happening? What safety controls are in place to prevent that from happening? And then from a cybersecurity perspective, you can start reverse engineering, well, there's this electronic safety system that's preventing this, but that's digital and it's internetworked. So can you go learn Modbus in a cyber range? Yes. Can you buy a PLC or get a virtual PLC to learn how to hack it? Yes. But that's not going to teach you as much as thinking about the system and a system of systems and how it can be broken. So if you're really interested in this stuff, I would encourage you to not go on eBay and buy a bunch of PLCs. The PLCs can be hacked, I promise. You can learn ladder logic on any of these devices, it's fine. What matters is how they all fit together. That's what you need to learn. You need to think about the whole process in any process. Once you learn one, you can do this exercise for any, I promise. Get access to some system of systems or somebody who's an expert in some kind of system of systems and start doing that thought exercise of what is our worst day ever? What is the consequence you care about? And then what prevents that from happening from a maintenance perspective, from a human perspective, physical controls, digital controls, redundancies, because that's what the adversaries are doing. That's what the state adversaries who want the power to go out are doing. What they do is they think about a power plant and they're like, well, we can get in. Yeah, we can get in. The intrusion vectors, again, aren't that complicated. Once we're in, we have to understand that there's 17 redundant PLCs doing this control. We have to understand that there is a physical set of safety controls. There's a bunch of humans watching the process. How do we evade all of that? Do we maybe show the operators a false set of information? Do we tamper with the digital safety controls? How do we evade that entire redundant system made to avoid maintenance problems and human error to actually do something specific? And that's the thing you're going to threat hunt for. That's the thing you're going to monitor for. That's the thing you're going to build your incident response plans around. I hope that helps. Sure. What else? No dumb questions. Everybody's so shy. You're here. You want to learn about OT? Yes. Yes, and there's one behind you after that.
Hello? Yeah, okay.
Hi.
So I have some experience designing systems in this space long time ago.
Okay. They haven't changed too much.
Yeah, that's actually my question. So back in the olden days, the general way to think about isolating the system is physical isolation, right? No internet access, remote access, obviously, for reasons that you said, very difficult to connect.
Yeah.
You're going to be setting up remote desktop, whatever. If you went to buy a system today, the latest, greatest, how has this changed? Surely they are designed these days with some kind of internet access.
They are. So they are improving. So I don't want you to get the idea that everything's horrible in OT. It's not. It really is improving. It's just improving slowly because some of these systems go into production for 30 years. So some of the newest, coolest security stuff, I'm seeing it come out now, but we're not going to see it in mass production for another 10 years. So it's just kind of behind. Some of the cool things that I see people implementing today, other than like more redundancies of digital systems, virtualized systems, is like application whitelisting. I'm seeing more systems with application whitelisting as a default, which is a really cool thing to do in these industrial devices that don't have a lot of extra stuff installed on them. Like it's a frustrating thing in enterprise environments to do like wide-scale application whitelisting, but in these industrial devices where you're not supposed to install or change anything, it's a pretty great tool to detect any tampering with the systems. So I'm seeing that. I'm seeing a little bit more validation of commands sent, like to PLCs. Like there's no encryption, there's no encoding, there's never going to be, because that's potential failure points. But there is a little bit more validation of authorized devices that can receive and send commands, so that's good. I'm seeing more embedded security appliances. So there's either monitoring appliances or anti-malware appliances deployed as a standard with some of these new systems. That wasn't always the case. Sometimes you had to pay extra for that. So things are improving. People are thinking about that. Some of the vendors are very eager to work with security researchers, and some still threaten to sue if you do a bug bounty report. So it's a mix. Some of the vendors are doing better than others, but things are slowly improving. The problem is these systems have very long life cycles. So for the newest, coolest cybersecurity things, we'll be seeing it in 10, 15 years in wide production. Great question. And there was one behind you.
Hi, thanks. Okay, just a question. Given the challenges highlighted in installing EDR solutions at endpoints, do you see more focus on network monitoring instead? That means instead of monitoring at endpoints, we try to monitor on the network. And how successful are these network monitoring solutions in terms of detecting
an interesting array.
threats?
That's a great question. It's an interesting array today. Some vendors do deploy some EDR solutions on some of the high-level systems, the non-critical operational systems like engineering workstations or gateways. And that's great. A lot of them are more industrial-focused EDR solutions, and they are chosen by the OEM. But I'll take it. That's wonderful. So we do see a bit of that. Deploying it yourself is very, very risky. That's a very hard decision to make. Again, it can introduce new failures into your industrial process. You want to usually make sure that's very, very vetted by the OEM and by your engineers before you do it. And you want to make sure that you know how it's going to impact your process. So I don't see any organizations that do wide-scale deployments of EDR across their entire industrial environment. What we produce at Dragos and what most of our competitors produce is a relatively passive network monitoring solution, because you can sit on a span port or a tap without interacting with the industrial devices. It can be quite sensitive and quite old. So the best bet is to go back in the time machine, get in the TARDIS, go back to like 2005, and do network-based monitoring heavily in these environments at the right choke points, so you can see both horizontal and vertical traffic. That's something you can do even on those low-level devices that you can't install any security tooling on. You can monitor those industrial protocols. You can do detection that way. But like everything else, this is a defense in-depth solution. So if you have some EDR, some antivirus, you're certainly going to want to log that. And then you're going to want to have that network detection as well to catch things that you cannot install agents on. Anything else? I think we've got time for like one more, maybe two more questions. Yes, hi. Oh, there's two right there. So those are our last two questions, and I saw the timer. Sorry. I know there's a microphone floating around somewhere.
Sorry, because just now he raised his hand earlier. So
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sure. There's a microphone behind
Thanks.
you. Yeah.
So I'll go several years back when OT was not prominent, and the systems were designed based on fail-safe systems or some formal methods, and the focus was human life at risk. So don't you think that system engineer should be a better person to do OT rather than IT guys trying to do fail-safe?
It has to be a combined effort. It really does have to be an effort of both the OT and the IT personnel. Like I mentioned, you don't get a cybersecurity person who understands the full details of those industrial processes and how to secure them, but you don't get an engineer or an operator who knows the full details of how a cybersecurity attack works against them. So it still has to be a combined effort between both teams. Maybe one more?
So I think we're a little out of time. I think for any further questions, maybe you guys can
Okay,
approach the
sounds good.
speaker
Fantastic.
later out the session.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here in Singapore. Pleasure to meet you all.